Galaxy Z Fold 5 versus the Galaxy S23 Ultra. Which one provides the better overall camera experience? Today, we find out. Shot for shot, clip for clip, we compare the two best smartphones in Samsung's lineup against each other. Let's go. The Galaxy S23 Ultra is Samsung's best slab smartphone they can possibly make. It's got years of R&D behind it, with everything that Samsung has learned about the smartphone industry packed into one incredible piece of smartphone hardware, especially on the camera front. But because the camera hardware isn't the same, people discount the Fold. They write it off and say it's not as good as the S23 Ultra. They make it feel like it's a lesser experience. Let's quickly break down the hardware front. On the S23 Ultra, you have the 4 rear cameras. You've got the ultra wide with dual pixel autofocus. You've got the 200 megapixel main camera that has an f1.7 aperture and quad pixel autofocus. You have a 3x telephoto lens that's 10 megapixel with dual pixel autofocus and a 10x 10 megapixel camera also with dual pixel autofocus. Plus, it's got a laser autofocus module to help it when it comes to things like focusing with the main camera, but also the portrait shots and for things like macro capabilities. Fold 5, a little bit more on the streamlined side. You've got the ultra wide camera, no dual pixel autofocus. You've got the 50 megapixel main camera, has dual pixel autofocus, and you've got the 3x telephoto, no dual pixel. Of course, you have the 10 megapixel cover selfie as well versus the 12 megapixel selfie camera on the S23 Ultra. The Fold 5 also has the under display camera. I'm not talking about that today at all, because it is not there to compete with selfie cameras. It's a video call camera. End of story. So this video is actually going to compare these two phones across 3 different categories. First, we're going to look at its photo capturing capabilities. We're then going to move on to how it can capture videos and the various ways you can do that. Then we're going to look at versatility, because both of these phones offer specialties that each phone can't do. And we're going to compare, and then you'll let me know which one you think comes out on top when it comes to what you might need from a smartphone camera. Let's kick it off with photos. So kicking it off by looking at just standard 12 megapixel shots across the different cameras that's on the back. The one thing that you'll notice in great lighting is from a detail perspective, there's no difference. You really won't actually find much of a difference when you pixel peep between the detail in the 12 megapixel resolution, no matter which camera you decide to take photos with. You'll see a bunch of stuff coming up on the screen now, and there's really no detail, particularly in good lighting. That being said, there is one big difference I noticed across the lenses in standard normal 12 megapixel photos that do separate these two phones. With the S23 Ultra, the processing, it gives it a more of a flatter feel, especially when you look at some of the colors, a little bit more muted, and the shadows are a little bit brighter. Whereas we compare that to the Z Fold 5, you've got shadows which are a little bit darker and a little bit more contrasty. And same when it goes to things like the sky. The sky is a lot more blue, and I think Samsung do this intentionally to give the Fold a bit of a different look and feel to the S23 Ultra. This isn't just for the main camera too, it does actually cross-pollinate, good word, across the different cameras. You can see here with the other cameras and the other zoom ranges, that difference exists no matter which camera you're using. What you like here kind of comes down to personal preference. You might like the flatter, more natural look of the S23 Ultra, and you might like a brighter photo. If you put the two photos side by side, a lot of people naturally will be looking for the brighter image. If you isolated the Fold 5's photos on their own, they are very pleasing. Aesthetically wise, you've got the contrasty with the sky, you've got the darker sort of contrast with the shadows. It gives you a bit of a different look, and it's more punchy. And people on their own, without having another reference, would probably like that, especially when it comes to uploading to social media, for example. I also tested the macro, but I'll get to that when we talk about versatility. When it comes to zoom, this is where the gap kind of widens between these two phones, but not as much as you might think. At 3x, because they're effectively the same camera. Yes, technically the S23 Ultra has the dual pixel, which will make it a faster camera when it comes to lower light, but also when it comes to focusing. But if you're just taking a photo, the detail in everything is going to be pretty much the same. The only differences are the ones I've already pointed out when you're looking at the previous thing I just spoke about. With the 2x, which is something I spoke about in the August versus July camera battle with the S23 Ultra that I did, you can notice a much sharper image in the 2x crop of the sensor versus the Fold 5. The Fold 5 isn't terrible. It probably looks like the way that the July update from the S23 Ultra looks like. But you can see the detail difference here with the football, for example, that's making a return. You can see that detail is retained in the ball and the stitching and the pattern on the S23 Ultra versus the Fold 5, which hasn't done a terrible job. It just hasn't got as much detail. That could be down to a couple of things, whether it's the higher resolution camera on the S23 Ultra has more resolution to crop in with. Ultimately, they're both 12 megapixel photos. It just looks like the S23 Ultra is doing a better job here. Moving beyond the 2 and the 3 times, you start to really notice where the differences lie here, especially at that 10 times level. The S23 Ultra is just phenomenal. The Fold 5 does pretty amicably with software handling this. It can do a decent enough job in good lighting, but the difference is just so staggering. You get reminded of how powerful the S23 Ultra camera really is. That 10 times camera is very imposing and something that's a lot of fun to use when you use it. And because you've got that 10 times paired with that 3 times, it does give you that more flexibility to get more different types of photos, especially when you start to go beyond the 10 times zoom level. The Fold 5 can go up to 30, but doesn't mean you should. Because at 30 times, comparing the two together, you can see a staggering difference in quality and output. And obviously the S23 Ultra goes up to 100, kind of like having 30 on the Fold 5, it's really not necessary. Moving on to portrait photography, I really struggled here. I was trying really hard to get my daughter to sit still, but she was not playing ball. She was just running around. She wouldn't sit still. I'd get one photo with the Fold and then the next photo she'd be off somewhere else. So I tried my best. Ultimately, though, what I landed on is that in portrait photography, there isn't much of an end product difference between these two. The S23 Ultra on paper has a better look and feel for portraits on paper because it's got the laser autofocus module to pair with the main camera and the 3 times lens. Fold 5 is relying purely on software and some depth information from the other cameras. Whilst on paper there's a difference, output-wise you won't notice too much if you choose the Fold over the S23 Ultra, for example. Obviously, both phones are capable of 50 megapixel shots from the main camera. Again, I put them side by side here. Other than the same shadow difference that I spoke about before, what I also noticed was that the 50 megapixel shot from the S23 Ultra had more detail about it. And I don't know whether that's because with software updates it's optimized a bit better, or just because it's got a higher ceiling with resolution. But you can see there's a lot more detail in the 50 megapixel from the Ultra versus the 50 megapixel from the Fold 5. That's not saying the Fold 5 is doing a terrible job. Not at all. It's just that the S23 Ultra does have more to it. That lead extends slightly more when you go to 200. The 200 versus 50, it just doesn't feel like you really need that 200. I know I've spoken about it before that it can, in the right scenarios, be a really good positive thing to have. But when you look at the side by side here, if you were deciding on these two phones based on camera alone, the 200 isn't a reason to pick the Ultra over the Fold 5. And night mode. I was really expecting a big, large gap in night mode photography with the S23 Ultra versus the Fold 5, largely because the sensor size of the S23 Ultra is considerably bigger than what the Fold 5 is. But seeing as how night mode leans heavily into software, it actually in the end result doesn't make too much of a difference. There was 1 or 2 photos that I did notice the detail being better from the S23 Ultra. I think that's largely to do with the actual sensor technology on the Ultra versus anything to do with the size of the sensor, because the S23 Ultra sensor is quite a bit more advanced than the Fold 5's main sensor. It's just, is that enough of a difference to not choose the Fold 5's camera? At night mode, I don't know. Where things really sort of separate when it comes to night mode photography is the fact that the Fold 5 acts as its own tripod. Like I said though, I've got a whole versatility section. I'll save that for when we get to there. Now if we're looking at the front camera versus the front camera, figure out which one I'm talking about. Make myself laugh. The S23 Ultra front camera versus front camera is far and away the better selfie camera. The 12 megapixel selfie camera on the Ultra has dual pixel autofocus. It's a slightly larger sensor size, just all round an exceptional selfie camera for what it is. And if you're going to take selfies on the Ultra, this is the way to do it. You can see the detail difference between the cover screen selfie on the Fold 5, and there is no difference. You just can see the better selfie. Fold 5 though has the tricks up its sleeve. The 3 rear cameras can be used as a selfie option with rear cam selfie. It's very easy to turn it on too. You just have to press the button in the top left corner, unfold it the opposite way, and the cameras are pointing at you. This just changes how you can take selfies. You can use the main camera, the ultra wide, so you can take ultra wide selfies. The portrait mode option becomes markedly better because you're using the rear camera for portraits versus just the 12 megapixel selfie camera. That's not to say the 12 megapixel selfie camera does a terrible job. In fact, I think it does a really, really good job at taking a portrait mode selfie, but you get more out of the rear cameras from the Fold 5, especially the fact that you can take high resolution selfies, although some of you might not want to do that. Okay, now we're swimming along into videos. This is where I truly expected to see a huge difference in output. Talking really early on in the video experience, I used both the S23 Ultra and the Fold 5 to record videos for this channel. Right now, the S23 Ultra is recording me in portrait video mode, but I've also, when I need to talk about the S23 Ultra, I use the Fold 5. So both of them handle video exceptionally well. There is some differences though, and that's what I want to talk about. Starting with 4K video, the one you'll probably shoot mostly in, 4K 30. Detail-wise, you don't notice much of a difference. Ultimately, both phones side by side, they output the same level of detail because it's 4K. You're not going to notice much of a difference on surface level. What I noticed though with the S23 Ultra versus the Fold 5 is the main camera on the S23 Ultra has that coating to help prevent lens flare. And that is very evident as you see these two videos side by side. The lens flare from the Fold 5 is much more evident and prominent versus what it is on the S23 Ultra. And that is all down to that coating that main lens has on the Ultra. What's also obvious here is stabilization. The S23 Ultra with its main camera has 2 times wider OIS compared to the S22 Ultra. And that was already good when it came to stabilization. So the correction angle on the Ultra is using both hardware and software in its full power to give you good stabilization. Not to say the Fold 5 is terrible. That's using a video digital image stabilization algorithm to help detect your next movement, and that does a really good job, but you can see the difference side by side. I'm even held the S23 Ultra in my left hand, my non-dominant hand, as I'm slowly jogging along, and you definitely notice how much smoother the S23 Ultra is, and this wasn't even super steady. Definitely evidence that the stabilization from videos you'll get better out of the S23 Ultra. The other thing I really wanted to test was the zoom when it came to video, and I knew what was going to happen. I knew that at 3 times the zoom difference was pretty much going to be non-existent, but when you go beyond the 3 times, you start to really see the benefits of having that 10 times zoom on the Ultra. It's so detailed, so detailed. And again, the Fold 5 does a tremendous job with software to try and keep up with it, but you just can't match that hardware prowess that the S23 Ultra has when it comes to zoom. To me though, what I found more interesting was testing the 2 times difference. Same way we did with photos, I wanted to test it with videos as well. Because of the way that they've improved it on the S23 Ultra, I wanted to see if the Fold 5 sort of could keep up with it. Again, you look at the ball difference here, and at 2 times, the S23 Ultra just has this incredible amount of detail. It's almost optical level. Fold 5, again, does a stellar job, but it just doesn't match it. So from a video perspective, in all sort of zoom ranges, the S23 Ultra has a really compelling package for video if that's what you're looking for. Again though, that doesn't mean the Fold 5 can't suit your needs, just the S23 Ultra can elevate what you're doing already. And then when you go in further with the football example too, again, it's just that lead just considerably goes further away. So from a video zoom, you obviously have to give it to the S23 Ultra, but it just depends if that's important to you, because at the normal sort of zoom ranges, the Fold 5 does a really good job when it comes to video. I also tested the microphone quality. I actually prefer if I hand it over to you guys and you let me know in the comments which one you feel did a better job of picking up my voice. I tested it both outside and inside, depending on the noise environments. So you let me know. This is the recording from both. I'm trying to do a mix of outside, and then I might go and do some inside. And the thing you might have to notice as well is some very loud machinery literally right next to me. Very, very loud. Let me know in the comments which video sounds better from the outside, and then also let me know which video sounds better from the inside. Obviously, might have to do a bit more talking on the inside one, but yeah, you get the idea. I also wanted to test the 8K, because both of these phones can shoot at 8K 30 frames per second, thanks largely in part to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy. That really did help give Samsung more power to enable that feature from the outset. What I noticed that the videos had a slight processing difference, and it actually reminded me heavily of the way the photos got processed, in that the shadows were a little bit darker on the Fold 5, and they kept everything a little bit lighter on the S23 Ultra. Thanks to that coating, the S23 Ultra did a really good job of keeping the lens flare out versus what the Fold 5 was able to do. From a detail perspective, very, very similar. And you can see from these 33 megapixel stills that you can extract from the 8K video that the detail wise is still very much the same across both. There's just those subtle differences thanks to the different hardware choices that the S23 Ultra has over the Fold 5. So for all the nitpicking over shadow here, detail there, crop here, zoom there, there's fundamental hardware differences that change the way you use both of these smartphones. So in versatility, you really have to look at which one might actually serve your purpose. From an output level, honestly, the Fold 5 can suit 95% of what you might want to do with the cameras. The S23 Ultra has that 5% difference in some areas that you might want to take advantage of. But let's take a look at what sets the Fold 5 apart from a just pure hardware level and versatility level. The thing that I really like with the Fold 5 is flex mode. I have done a whole video actually looking at the Fold 5 and its unique capabilities when it comes to camera, but let's touch on some of them here just to really showcase to you versus the Ultra. Flex mode has just so many different use cases, both in photography and in videography. For photos, you obviously have the night mode, but you can just put the phone down on a table when you're out at breakfast, for example. Frame it up and you have yourself a really nice convenient camera framed up and just shooting. Whether that be using single take, whether that be using portrait mode, you've got that there at any moment and you can just continue going about your breakfast without needing to constantly feel like you're shoving cameras in front of your kids' faces, for example. For the S23 Ultra, you need a tripod to do these types of things, whether that be night mode, whether that be setting it up for video. The Fold 5 doesn't need that. The Fold 5 also can take advantage of flex mode with other ways, things like auto framing. Again, you set the phone down, let it do its thing, and you can enjoy the moment and you can be comfortably letting the phone take care of it. Now, the S23 Ultra does have auto framing as well, but you need that tripod to make it feel the same. So you need that extra accessory. So if you want to, absolutely go ahead and do that. But the Fold 5 comes with it basically out of the box because it's got the flex mode capability. The other thing we kind of touched on is rear camera selfies. You know, like if you're someone who takes a lot of group photos or you take a lot of videos when it comes to people around you, having rear camera quality as selfie cameras is phenomenal. And you have access to all the modes too. It's not just the fact that you've got the rear cameras available, you have different modes available to you. You can record using the 4K 30 rear camera mode, changing between the lenses if you like. You've got single take from there, you've got portrait video, you've got lots of different modes all down the bottom to take advantage of using higher quality cameras. That's what I really like about it. There's also the versatility of using the inner display for a viewfinder, either in super large format or taking advantage of the capture view, which takes advantage, I'll say takes advantage some more, of that bigger display. Left-hand side for review, right-hand side for preview, and changing the modes. Like it's got some more things about it that can change your habits with how you take smartphone photography and videography. But it misses out on a lot of things that the S23 Ultra does exceptionally well. Two things, for example, 10 times zoom. It's so powerful to have this in your pocket. I have my son who plays football, and for me, sometimes you have to sit a bit far away. So for me, having 10 times zoom in my pocket, I can simply just point the phone at his direction and I can see clearly what he's doing on the field. It's so good for that purpose. And you can imagine 100 other ways, whether you're at a music concert, whether you're at a sports game, wherever you're sitting, you're not limited to, because you can use the 10 times zoom and beyond to get closer to the action. The Fold 5, for as amazing as it is, simply cannot output that. Part of me thinks Samsung knows that if they just put 10 times on a foldable, it's goodbye S23 Ultra. But also I think that this hardware takes up so much space, and Samsung's priority with the Fold right now is to make it as compact, lightweight, and pocketable as possible. If we were to put this hardware on this phone, it would kind of change that. I think we're heading there eventually, but right now it makes sense to have some separation. That also extends with the Ultra to macro photography, for example, or really just laser autofocus in general. That laser autofocus module allows the phone to detect when things are close to it, whether that be for taking better portraits or, in the instance I'm about to demonstrate, for macro. Because it's got this thing called focus enhancer, when you get close to a subject, the laser autofocus module detects that by measuring the distance between your phone and the object. Then it activates the focus enhancer, or if you just simply want to switch the ultra wide camera you can get really, really close to something. You can see the difference here between the S23 Ultra, and I tried really hard with the 3x camera on the Fold to get close, and it did okay. But the macro, it can go closer. It just gives you better and more options. So S23 Ultra, for the fact that it doesn't fold, it makes up for it with other things, like the ability to go from really, really, really close to really, really, really far away. And its selfie camera isn't too bad either. So as a package, the Ultra is quite good too. Plus, of course, you've got the S Pen. You can use that S Pen as a remote shutter for your camera, whether that be to change modes, whether that be to zoom in or zoom out. You've got that flexibility. Yes, you can get the S Pen Pro for the Fold 5, but it's nothing like having it inbuilt into the phone. And again, that's some sort of unique aspect for the S23 Ultra. As a bottom line, overall, the S23 Ultra has a better overall output, whether that be personal preference wise or just plain zoom. You've got a more sort of varied output that you can get from the S23 Ultra. But if you can compare the things that they both do well, the Fold 5 actually does keep up with the S23 Ultra, and you don't miss out on much. It's just that zoom that you really miss, and things like macro that you also sort of miss out on. But you make up for that in other ways. You make up for that by the versatility that flex mode brings you, with things like auto framing, things like being able to just set the phone down and get different sort of angles, better nighttime photos because you've got the tripod inbuilt in your phone. The Fold 5 just opens up new ways of capturing the world around you and the moments that maybe mean more to you. We're conditioned so much for the way slab smartphones make us take photos. Sometimes it can take something like a Fold 5 coming along to change that behavior. So if you want to build those new habits, if you want new ways of doing things, maybe choose the Fold 5 and its camera experience over the S23 Ultra and see how you go. That's it though for this week. I really appreciate you coming by and getting on board with seeing how these two phones take photos. I put a lot of big effort into this one, so I would absolutely appreciate if you'd subscribed if you're new here. Go back and watch some other stuff too, because there's a lot of content that I have put out over the course of this year, and there's plenty more to come. So yeah, subscribe, like this video, and of course, I'm on socials, so come check me out on Twitter and Instagram between now and my next video, and I'll see you then. Oh, it's my birthday, by the way. Bye!